Hello and welcome. Today we study Bequest by Eunice De Souza. And Eunice De Souza, as we know, is an Indian feminist poet, and a short video about her work and a detailed analysis of another poem of hers called Advice to Women has also been shared on my channel. So if you're interested, you can actually hop on to that video as well. Now let's talk about bequest. The title bequest means an act of leaving a gift to a loved one through a will, something which you leave behind. So it's basically something of a sacrifice. It can be looked at as a sacrifice. It is something that you leave as a legacy. Okay. While reading this poem, we should keep in mind that Eunice De Souza is a feminist poet, and when she writes, even though she would not, necessarily talk about, oppression overtly, but we need to look at her poems through her feminist politics. Okay, so this poem, because we know about Eunice De Souza's style, we can judge that this poem is also about how women are conditioned to be in a certain way, and in this process, in this idea of, in this bequest, they lose their own identity. Okay, and to give you a very short understanding, a very simple understanding of how Eunice De Souza writes, her style is actually very minimalist. The lines of some of her poems would just have three words or four words, right? And very short lines. There's no specific meter that she follows. There's no special rhyme scheme that she follows, but you would still see the poem feels like a poem. She is, despite very few words, she would be able to show you a vivid imagery. She would be able to communicate very well despite its brevity. In fact, the brevity, the fact that she writes such short lines is actually the beauty of her poetry. And it's actually very hard to write in such short lines. It's difficult. It's more difficult to be brief while you're writing. Okay, and Eunice De Souza has that talent, when she writes poetry. Now let's begin the stanzas, this poem stanza by stanza. So the first stanza reads, in every Catholic home there's a picture of Christ holding his bleeding heart in his hand. I used to think, okay, first of all, notice the enjambment in the first and the second lines. So you see here there's a picture of Christ. So when the sentence continues between two lines, that is enjambment, right? And I used to think, she shows, this is actually an expression of disgust. Okay, now let me go to the picture that she's describing. In every Catholic home there's a picture of Christ holding his bleeding heart. So perhaps it's something like this picture that she's talking about. In some of these pictures you also have Christ holding the heart in his hand, but this is the Sacred Heart. This is the picture which is very, very common in Catholic homes, in Catholic schools, in churches, and the picture actually represents God's boundless and passionate love for mankind, basically something that he sacrificed for his love of the people who he was leaving behind. So as a child, when she would look at this picture, this is, she's there's an I in the poem, right? So we imagine that it's the poet, right? So as a child, she was disgusted by this image. She is not really, she doesn't see the beauty of this particular picture, and a religious believer would find this, would not have feelings of disgust looking at this picture. But remember, she's a child. Okay, and it's understandable how such an image could overwhelm a child. To adults, it fails to really appeal. It isn't of much consequence to an adult, but as a child, she is understandably affected by this picture, and so she takes it seriously, right? And we would come to this image of Christ holding out his heart at the end of the poem. It's also so coming back to her disgust. The lesson, the idea of bequeathing your heart, the idea of bequeathing a part of your body, is actually a lesson given very often to women, and this is not really a literal giving up a part of your body or an organ of your body. The whole idea that you should be able to sacrifice some part of you, right? Not literally your heart, but a part of your identity, and you forgo your happiness for others. That is an expectation made out of women very, very often. So this bequest is clearly meant for women, and women too, according to the poet, women too, like Christ, have to give up a part of themselves. Okay, so that's the basic idea which is shared in the poem. Okay, but it feels like it's a very strong theme. It feels like it's a very difficult theme, but the way she expresses it, it's very breezy. Okay, so she is very smooth in her expression. The only person with whom I have not exchanged confidences is my hairdresser. This is the second stanza. Now, what does this mean? Now, holding your heart out would also mean that you are honest. Okay, so the poet would be honest about her feelings, but perhaps the only person who doesn't really know how she thinks, or the person who she has not really shared all her feelings is her hairdresser. And maybe this is a person who's simply an acquaintance and who just doesn't meet her very often, and like everybody else, he also has a lot of advice for her. He doles out his advice while he's at his work, right? Or maybe when he's doing her hair, he is giving her some advice. Now she says, some recommend, this is the third stanza, some recommend stern standards, others say float along. He says, take it as it comes, meaning, of course, as he hands it out. What does this mean? So as usual, women are very often given the advice by people around them. They are asked not to stick out, and this can be done in many ways. Some women are asked to have stern standards, meaning having a very hard, inflexible principles of what it means to be a woman with respect to your character, with respect to your mannerisms. Women are very often taught how to talk a certain way, how to eat a certain way, how to work in a certain way which is supposed to be look elegant, how to deal with family, how to deal with friends. So there are many standards which women are expected to abide by. So that could be one way. Or floating along would mean, now she says, some recommend stern standards, others say float along. Now what does floating along mean? Floating along meaning agree with the dominant tribe, right? Do and say what is expected from you, irrespective of what you feel or think. So you may have also seen that many people do not really ask to questions, and they willingly submit to expectations made from them. So they're just floating along, they're just surviving in a world without too many without quibbling too much. Okay, so these are two ways in which women are mostly expected to behave. What this hairdresser says is to take it as it comes, meaning whatever he or whatever the man asks you to do, basically to be at the receiving end of the thought process of this man. Okay, so of course it feels like it's a very harmless advice, right? Take it as it comes. This is a very harmless sounding advice, but there's nothing to do in this advice, right? When you have to just take what comes to you, You are simply a passive recipient of whatever happens to you and your life, right? And that's the perfect way anybody would be able to oppress you, right? Now you would feel that I am making a very serious interpretation of this poem. You can take it as a lighter interpretation, but this is my interpretation. This is how I feel the poet has expressed with the words "take it as it comes," right? Now the next few stanzas get a little more serious, okay, and also she is able to be very ironic in these particular last stanzas, okay. The next stanza goes, I wish I could be a wise woman. Notice wise and woman, the W is capitalized in both the places. So she says, I wish I could be a wise woman, smiling endlessly, vacuously, like a plastic flower, saying, child, learn from me. Now, these are lines which are, extremely catchy. I have also talked about these lines in my other video. So this whole idea that, a wise woman, who's a wise woman? A woman who's learned how to survive in the society, right? And that's the reason she's written wise and woman in both capitalized initials. So wise women are expected to appear happy and pretty always, and they should not be impacted by emotions, and their beauty should not be impacted. Their beauty should not get affected by what they are thinking. So she compares this figure of an ideal woman who's always beautiful, who's always happy, to something like a plastic flower, right? You're not expected women to have a real persona, right? They're not supposed to have a real personality of their own. They're always supposed to repress their inner selves. So someone who has accepted all norms imposed on her, or who has given up on doing anything, so she, to the outside world, she appears happy, she appears pretty, she appears like a plastic flower, right? So that's what she means by the word plastic flower. So she's using irony here. She does not want women to become like plastic flowers, and she does not create this ideal of plastic flower. She's actually saying that it's very hard to think that anybody would be able to happily be this plastic flower, right? And so she's being very ironic in this particular stanza. I mean, she says, saying, child, learn from me. And here in the poem, child is actually written with a capitalized initial. Child, learn from me is also in a way belittling the other person, child, by calling them the other women child. The circle of tradition is reinforced by women themselves. How women reinforce oppression by living a certain kind of life. Of course, they may not have a choice, but this examples of the perfectly happy, very beautiful woman who is always following patriarchal standards, those examples are also set by women themselves, right? So this circle of violence, or the circle of tradition, is actually continued by women, okay? And so women in a way impose these standards on themselves. So that's what she means when she says, I wish I could be a wise woman, smiling endlessly, vacuously, like a plastic flower, saying, child, learn from me. So she is not like this wise woman. She doesn't want to be this plastic flower, and in fact she is criticizing the idea that anybody could be this plastic flower. This is the last stanza. It's time to perform an act of charity to myself. Bequest the heart like a spare kidney, preferably to an enemy. Now, what does this mean? She says that I can perform, the final act. Now we come back to the first image of the Christ sacrificing his heart. She wants to sacrifice her heart, because it's difficult to coexist with these norms. It's she can't be that plastic flower. She can't be happy in such circumstances. And the best way to do it is to do away with your feelings, right? To deny your feelings. And she does not, she finds herself incapable to deny such feelings. So she wants to bequeath her heart like it's something spare. Her heart makes her feel emotions. Her heart makes her be mindful of the oppression that she's feeling, right? So she wants to give up her heart, right? And how would she live without her heart, right? So she says that I want to give up my heart like it's as if it's something spare, like a spare kidney, without which she would still be able to manage, and she wants to give up this heart to an enemy. Why would she want to give up her heart to an enemy? It's basically because friends and loved ones are all the ones who are a part of the patriarchal circle. This is the patriarchal circle that she's come out from, and she has been on the receiving end of these norms through the circle of friends and loved ones. So she does not want to bequeath her heart to somebody who's within her inner circle. She would want to give away her heart to her enemy, right? Maybe because she wants the enemy to feel what she feels. So this is the bequest, basically, giving up of the final act of giving up your heart, like Christ has given up his heart for mankind. For her, it means that she has to give up a part of her identity to follow some very improbable, difficult standards. So this was the poem Bequest. This was actually a request from one of my subscribers, Irshad. Thank you, Irshad, for asking for this poem. Hope you appreciate this video. And for others, if there's anything you would like me to cover, if there's anything that you would like me to discuss in any of my videos, or if you have any advice or comments to share, please feel free to do that. I very often honor the advice given to me and the requests also made from me. Thank you so much. I'll see you again next week.